Hi, Ed here from keywordspeopleuse.com, and I've got an exclusive time-limited offer for you. If you book a product demo with Keywords People Use, I'll give you a free 7-day trial of our standard plan, which allows you access to our new content optimization tool. This tool hooks into your Google Search Console data so we can find all the keywords you're ranking for and what pages are ranking. We then crawl your site content and use advanced machine learning techniques like embeddings and cosine similarity to find you content optimization opportunities that will quickly boost your impressions and clicks from Google. This new feature in Keywords People Use is already showing results for people using it. Don't miss out on the opportunity of a 7-day free trial. Just go to keywordspeopleuse.com/demo to book your slot. That's keywordspeopleuse.com/demo. You'll find the link in the show notes of this episode. Hello and welcome to SEO is Not That Hard. I'm your host Ed Dawson, the founder of the SEO intelligence platform keywordspeopleuse.com, where we help you discover the questions people ask online and then how to optimize your content to build traffic and authority. I've been in SEO and online marketing for over 20 years, and I'm here to share the wealth of knowledge, hints and tips I've amassed over that time. Hello and welcome back to SEO is Not That Hard. It's me, Ed Dawson, here as usual. And today I wanted to share with you something that someone shared with me. This is something that a friend of the show, listener of the show, Greg, sent me. Now, he's been listening to and following the growth framework as I've been sharing it. And he took the audio files of the podcast that I've been discussing the growth framework on and fed it into Google's Notebook LM. Now, if you're not familiar with Notebook LM, it's a product from Google. It's an AI product where you give it some content, whether that be text content or audio content or video content or whatever, and it'll summarize it and it'll present it as like an audio podcast, essentially, of a male and a female voice discussing the content that it's had shared with it. And so Greg sent me this, and I've had a listen, and it's a bit spooky, to be honest, for me, because they're obviously discussing the concepts that I've been sharing. But it's also quite cool because they actually get it at least 99% of the way there, I think. The only thing I slightly disagreed was they got a little bit hung up on meta descriptions, which, while can be useful, I wouldn't spend the whole of my time optimizing those because Google just because Google changes them so much nowadays. But apart from that, I was really, really impressed with how they went through it, and potentially, I don't know, they might make it even more accessible than I've made it when I've spoken about it. I don't know, but maybe that's just me doubting my own abilities. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop that audio in now. So listen to this, and this is the growth framework, minus obviously the last section, the hone and repeat section, which I haven't released the podcast on yet. So, but it's got, most of the growth framework is in the first 5 stages, so it gets most of the way there. So yeah, let's go and share that now, and let me know what you think.
You ever feel like you're drowning in information, trying to learn something new, and it's just endless articles and blog posts? You're looking for that core understanding to signal in all the noise.
Absolutely. It's that classic paradox of information overload. We've got more access to knowledge than ever before, but actually grasping the essentials can be a real challenge.
Well, hopefully today we can cut through some of that for you. We're going to be diving into a really interesting framework for online growth, specifically for growing content and traffic. And what's great about the material you sent over is that it's based on like 20 years of real world experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so valuable. It's not just theoretical fluff. It's battle-tested wisdom from someone who's been in the trenches.
Right. So this isn't some fly-by-night guru promising overnight success. It's a framework built on practical, sustainable methods.
Exactly. And the way it's structured, it really breaks down this complex process into manageable steps. It's the GROWT framework: gather, refine, optimize, watch, and tune.
Okay, so 5 key stages. I'm assuming we're going to unpack each of these in detail today.
That's the plan. Consider this your shortcut to understanding this growth methodology.
I like the sound of that. So let's jump right in. First step, gather. What's the essence of this stage?
It all starts with understanding your audience, right? And specifically understanding the questions they're actually asking.
So like thinking beyond just keywords.
Right. Every search query, every term someone types into Google is a question driven by a need. They want to solve a problem, learn something new, figure something out.
That makes sense. So in the gather stage, we're essentially trying to uncover those core questions, those underlying needs.
Exactly. And when your content directly answers those questions, that's where the magic happens. You're not just chasing clicks. You're building trust, establishing yourself as a go-to resource.
Okay, I'm seeing the long game here. So where do we start? Where do we find these hidden questions?
Well, the source material suggests several really interesting starting points. One of the most obvious is Google's People Also Ask the PAA section.
Oh yeah, those boxes that pop up after you do a search.
Exactly. Those are gold. They show you related questions that other people have asked, which gives you amazing insight into how user curiosity flows. One question often leads to another, right?
So you can see the natural learning journey someone might take when researching a topic.
Exactly. By addressing those related questions in your content, you show that you understand the full context of their search.
It's like anticipating their needs before they even realize they have them. Pretty smart.
And then you've got Google Autocomplete, those suggestions that pop up as you type.
Yeah, those can be helpful, especially for those really specific long-tail questions.
Right, and you'll also see those common question modifiers, how, why, what, when. They give you a sense of the nuance of what people are really looking for.
Okay, so we've got Google itself as a source, but then the material also talked about going beyond Google, places like Reddit and Quora.
Yeah, those are great for getting a more raw, unfiltered view of what people are asking. You see people asking questions in their own words, often within really niche communities or focused discussions.
So you can get a sense of needs or pain points that might not have even surfaced in the broader search landscape yet.
Precisely. It's like getting a glimpse into their thought process before it's been distilled into a polished search query.
Makes sense. And it's not just those big platforms, right? What about smaller forums, social media groups, things like that?
Yeah, those can be absolute gold mines. Because they're often highly focused, the questions asked can be incredibly specific, giving you deeper context into what a particular segment of your audience really cares about.
I imagine trying to keep track of all these questions across all these different places could get pretty overwhelming.
It definitely could. That's where tools come in handy. Keywords people use was mentioned in the material as a good example.
So how do these tools help?
Well, they're designed to automate a lot of the heavy lifting. They can pull in a huge volume of queries from all those sources we talked about, saving you a ton of time and making sure you don't miss anything important.
So the key takeaway from the gather stage seems to be cast a wide net, collect as many questions as possible, and don't worry too much about relevance just yet.
That's the gist of it. The next step, refine, is where we start making sense of all this data.
Okay, so on to refine. What's the core concept here?
Refine is all about transforming that raw data, those hundreds or even thousands of questions, into meaningful clusters. It's about organizing by theme and intent so you can see the bigger picture.
Instead of just a massive list of individual questions, we start to see the patterns emerge.
That's it. And this is critical for avoiding information overload and for crafting a content strategy that's truly aligned with your audience's needs.
And the material specifically mentioned a SERT clustering process used by keywords people use. For those who might not be familiar, can you quickly explain what XRP means in this context?
Sure. SRP stands for Search Engine Results page, basically, the page you see after you type a search into Google. What's interesting about SRP clustering is that it doesn't just look at the words and the questions themselves. It analyzes the actual search results for each query.
So if Google is consistently showing the same websites for a bunch of different questions, that suggests those questions are thematically linked, even if the words themselves aren't that similar.
Exactly. It's like letting Google guide our understanding of how those questions relate to each other, which would be really insightful.
That's a cool way to approach it, leveraging Google's own intelligence. Now, the material did mention that while these tools are powerful, manual adjustments are still important. Why is that?
Well, as sophisticated as algorithms are these days, they can't always capture the subtle nuances of language and context that a human can. You might see connections between clusters that a tool misses, or you might decide to break down a large cluster into smaller, more focused subclusters.
So it's a collaborative process. The tool does the heavy lifting, and then we come in with our human judgment to fine-tune things.
Precisely. And remember, this whole process is using the raw question data we gathered in the first step. We haven't filtered anything out, so the clustering tool has a really rich data set to work with.
That makes sense. So now we have these refined clusters. How do we actually make sense of them in terms of content strategy?
Well, interpreting those clusters involves looking at a few key aspects. First, you want to identify the main content themes, the core topics, and any natural subtopics that emerge within each cluster.
Right, so we're starting to see the broad areas we should be focusing on.
Exactly. And then you want to try and discern the dominant user intent within each cluster. Are people looking for how-to guides, explanations, definitions, comparisons, or something else?
So understanding not just what they're asking about, but also what they're hoping to get out of the answer.
Exactly. And finally, the sheer number of questions within a cluster can be telling. A cluster packed with questions suggests a lot of interest in that topic.
So a dense cluster would likely be a high priority area for content creation.
Right. It indicates significant demand. Conversely, a smaller cluster might represent a more niche topic, but it could also be a great opportunity to become a leading voice in a less crowded space.
Makes sense. So we've gathered the questions, we've refined them into clusters. Now, how do we decide which clusters to prioritize? Which ones actually get turned into content first?
That's the million-dollar question. There are several criteria to consider. First, think about audience demand. Does this topic align with your target audience's interests and needs? Is it something they're actively searching for?
So we want to make sure it's relevant to the people we're trying to reach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you want to consider the content potential itself. Is there enough depth to this topic to create truly comprehensive and valuable content? Is there room to go beyond the surface level?
Okay, so we need to ensure it's something we can actually create substantial content around.
Right.
What else should we be thinking about?
Think about your strategic business goals. Does this cluster align with your revenue objectives or other key outcomes? Can you build a sustainable content series around this topic?
So we need to make sure it fits into the bigger picture of our business, not just a one-off piece of content.
Right. And then, of course, you can't ignore the competitive landscape. How much competition is there for this cluster? Are there any subclusters where you might have an easier time ranking?
I imagine it's always good to try and find those sweet spots where there's decent demand, but not too much competition.
Exactly. And the material suggested using a simple scoring system to help prioritize those clusters. You assign points based on the criteria we just talked about: demand, potential, strategic alignment, competitive intensity. That helps you rank them and map out a content calendar.
Makes sense. So gather, we're collecting those raw questions. Refine, we're making sense of the data and prioritizing those clusters. Now we get to step 3, optimize. This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
It is. Optimize is where those carefully curated question clusters get turned into high-quality content that's designed to rank well and engage your audience.
First thing that comes to mind when I think about creating content is, what format should it be?
Absolutely. Different topics and different audiences will call for different formats. You might choose a detailed written guide, a video, a podcast episode, even an interactive tool.
So we need to think strategically about what format will best serve the content and resonate with our audience.
Precisely. A complex how-to process might be best explained through a step-by-step article, while a conceptual or discussion-based topic might lend itself better to a video or podcast.
And I imagine a lot of this comes down to understanding how your target audience prefers to consume information.
For sure. Some people are visual learners, some prefer audio, some want to read. It's also about experimenting and seeing what works best for you.
Okay, so we've picked our format. Now we need to actually create or update the content.
Right. The material talks about developing a content blueprint before you even start writing or recording.
A content blueprint. What is that exactly?
It's essentially a detailed outline that maps out all the key questions within that cluster and how you're going to address them.
So it's like a roadmap for ensuring that your content is comprehensive and logically structured.
Exactly. And when you're creating brand new content, you want to focus on clarity, depth, and engagement. Make sure you're answering all the relevant questions thoroughly and accurately.
And don't be afraid to make it engaging, right? Storytelling, case studies, things like that.
Exactly. People remember stories. And always try to provide actionable insights that your audience can immediately apply. The more practical value you offer, the better.
Makes sense. Now, what about content we've already published? I imagine it's not a set it and forget it situation, right?
Not at all. The material talked about refreshing and updating existing content.
So regularly reviewing your content and looking for ways to make it better.
Exactly. Add new information, update statistics, integrate new keywords, enhance visuals, improve calls to action. Keep it current and competitive.
And even if the content is comprehensive, we need to make sure it's presented in a way that's easy to digest, right?
Absolutely. Use clear headings, bullet points, visuals, and white space to break up large blocks of text. Make it scannable and easy on the eyes.
Okay, and of course we can't talk about content creation without addressing SEO. What are some of the key on-page best practices we should be focusing on?
Well, first and foremost, you need to make sure your content is easily understood by search engines. That means using clear, descriptive headings and subheadings, strategically incorporating relevant keywords, and writing compelling meta titles and descriptions.
So those are the little snippets of text that people see in the search results.
Yes, they need to grab attention and make people want to click through. And don't forget about your URLs. Keep them concise, descriptive, and ideally include your target keyword.
And what about internal linking?
Super important. Use descriptive anchor text to link to other relevant content on your site. It helps distribute authority and guides users to more valuable information.
And don't forget image optimization.
Right. Use descriptive file names and alt text. Compress those images for faster loading. And consider schema markup where appropriate. And of course, mobile optimization is non-negotiable these days. Make sure your website is responsive and looks great on all devices.
And finally, let's talk about readability.
Readability is all about making your content easy and enjoyable to consume. Use appropriate paragraph lengths, break up text with lists, and choose fonts and colors that are easy on the eyes. Accessibility is also crucial. Make sure your site is usable for everyone.
So optimize really encompasses a lot. It's about crafting great content, making sure it's SEO friendly, and ensuring a positive user experience.
It's a holistic approach. You want your content to be discoverable, engaging, and valuable.
Okay, now we've got all this amazing content out there. What's next?
The fourth step is watch.
So now we're observing what happens.
Exactly. Watch is all about monitoring and measuring the success of your content. It's an ongoing process of tracking key metrics and looking for insights.
And what kind of metrics should we be paying attention to?
Well, you'll want to keep a close eye on those core SEO metrics. Organic traffic, click-through rates, average position in search results. These tell you how visible and relevant your content is.
So we're looking for trends, trying to understand if our content is gaining traction or if there are any issues.
Exactly. And you also want to track user engagement metrics. How long are people staying on the page? How far down are they scrolling? Or are they clicking on internal links? These tell you if your content is actually resonating with your audience.
So we're not just looking at traffic, but also trying to understand how people are actually interacting with the content once they arrive.
Precisely. And then, of course, you want to track conversions. Are people signing up for your newsletter, downloading content, making purchases? That tells you how effective your content is in driving those desired actions.
Makes sense. So we need to make sure we're not just driving traffic, but also driving the right kind of traffic people who are actually taking the actions we want them to take.
Exactly. And there are a couple of tools that are really helpful for this. Google Analytics 4 and Clicky.com, they offer a lot of insightful data.
And Google Search Console was mentioned as a really important resource as well, right?
Absolutely. It gives you direct insights from Google about how your site is performing in search. You can see how many impressions you're getting, how many clicks, your average position, any indexing issues you might have, mobile usability problems, and even core web vitals data.
Wow, so that's a really comprehensive view of your search performance.
It is. And the material did mention a potential limitation, the 1,000 row limit in some Search Console reports.
So for larger sites, you might not be seeing the full picture.
Right. But there's a workaround. You can use the Google Search Console API. Some tools, like keywords people use, leverage this to access a lot more data, sometimes up to 50,000 rows.
Okay, so there are ways to get a more complete picture, even for those larger websites. With all of this data at our fingertips, what should we be focusing on? What are the key takeaways?
Well, you want to regularly monitor those organic search metrics. See if your visibility is trending up or down. Pay attention to those engagement metrics. See what content is keeping people engaged and what's falling flat. Keep a close eye on those conversion metrics. Understand what content is actually driving the results you want.
And make sure you're keeping an eye on those technical SEO indicators in Search Console so you can catch any issues early on.
Exactly. And don't forget about competitive analysis. See how you stack up against others in your space. That can help you identify opportunities and stay ahead of the curve.
So Watch is all about establishing a continuous feedback loop. We're not just launching content into the void, we're actively monitoring and learning from how it performs.
That's the key. Data is your friend.
Okay, and that brings us to the final stage of these initial 5 steps. Tune. What's the essence of this phase?
Tune is where you take all those valuable insights you've gathered during the watch phase and use them to refine your content strategy. You're pinpointing specific opportunities for improvement to boost visibility, engagement, and conversions.
So it's about taking action based on what the data is telling us.
Precisely. And this is where tools that integrate with your Google Search Console data can be super helpful.
And the material specifically highlighted the value of using search analytics to identify growth opportunities.
Yeah, search analytics can reveal a lot. You can dive deep into those key metrics, clicks, impressions, CTR, average position, and filter the data in all sorts of ways to identify underperforming pages or high potential keywords.
So you're really able to drill down and see what's working and what's not, and at a very granular level.
Exactly. And you can also see how Google algorithm updates are impacting your traffic, which is really valuable for understanding sudden changes in performance.
Makes sense. And then there was that content optimizer tool that was mentioned. How does that work?
This tool is really cool. It actually crawls your website, analyzes your content, and compares it to your Google Search Console data to see how well your content is aligned with the keywords you're ranking for.
So it can tell you if your content is actually relevant to the search queries it's attracting.
Exactly. It calculates a cosine similarity score, which is basically a measure of how topically relevant your content is to those keywords.
So if your similarity score is low, that means you might be ranking for certain terms, but your content isn't really hitting the mark.
Right. And the tool also tracks how often specific keywords are mentioned in your content, so you can see if you're missing any opportunities to emphasize those important terms.
And you can use the tool to identify pages that are ranking on the second page of Google or that have really low similarity scores, basically, pages that are ripe for optimization.
That's right. And there's also a really cool feature that lets you see a timeline of content changes and how they've impacted your rankings.
So you can see what updates have worked well in the past and try to replicate those successes.
Exactly. Data-driven decision-making at its finest.
Okay, so we've got these insights from both search analytics and the content optimizer. Now what? How do we actually put them into action?
Well, you want to start by focusing on those queries where you're getting a lot of impressions but not a lot of clicks, or where your similarity score is low. Those are clear signs that your content isn't fully meeting the needs of your audience.
So we need to make sure our content is truly relevant to those search queries, not just tangentially related.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure you're clearly and naturally integrating those key phrases into your content. Update your headings and subheadings to better reflect those traffic-driving queries. Consider restructuring your content to directly address specific questions your audience is asking.
So we might need to break up those big blocks of text, add some bullet points, make it more scannable.
Exactly. And don't forget to learn from those past content changes. If you see that a particular update led to a jump in rankings, try to replicate those strategies.
And always be experimenting.
Yes. A/B testing is a great way to find out what really resonates with your audience. Try different versions of your titles, meta descriptions, even the content itself. And of course, monitor everything closely. See what's working and what's not, and keep iterating.
So Tune is all about using data to continuously refine and improve our content strategy, right?
Exactly. It's about closing the gap between what your audience is searching for and what your content is delivering.
This has been a really insightful breakdown of the GROWT framework. It's a lot to take in, but having it broken down into these 5 manageable steps makes it feel much more approachable.
It's a framework anyone can use. It just takes a bit of time and effort.
And you mentioned earlier that there are actually 2 more steps in the full GROWT framework: hone and repeat. We didn't have time to dive into those today, but can you give us a quick preview?
Sure. Hone is all about refining the entire process based on your experiences with the first 5 steps. You're looking at what worked well, what didn't, and streamlining your workflow.
So it's about making the process itself more efficient and effective.
Exactly. And then repeat is about acknowledging that this isn't a one-time project. It's an ongoing cycle of continuous improvement. You're always gathering new data, refining your strategy, and optimizing your content.
It's a content flywheel.
Exactly. We'll definitely have to do another deep dive to explore those final stages in more detail.
For now, think about which of these 5 steps, gather, refine, optimize, watch, tune, might be the most helpful for you right now.
And if you have any questions about any of this or any specific areas you'd like us to dive deeper into, feel free to reach out. We're here to help.
Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. And yeah, obviously, if you've heard anything from Notebook LLM before, then you will definitely recognize those voices. It's going to be super interesting. I think I might do the same thing when I've obviously got the hone and repeat section done, feeding it in, and when I've got the entire sort of book I'm working on. When that's finished with all the examples and everything, then put that in and see what they come up with after we've got it all completed. But I thought it was really, really good summary with where we are so far. So hope you find it interesting. And if there's anything you want to share any feedback you've got, anything you ever want to share, then do. I love hearing from people who listen, and it's great to have heard from Greg. So thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate it. And remember, until next time, keep optimizing, stay curious. Remember, SEO is not that hard when you understand the basics. Thanks for listening. It means a lot to me. This is where I get to remind you where you can connect with me and my SEO tools and services. You can find links to all the links I mentioned here in the show notes. Just remember, with all these places where I use my name, the Ed is spelled with 2 Ds. You can find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. Just search for Ed Dawson on both. You can record a voice question to get answered on the podcast. The link is in the show notes. You can try our SEO intelligence platform, Keywords People Use, at keywordspeopleuse.com, where we can help you discover the questions and keywords people are asking online, cluster those questions and keywords into related groups so you know what content you need to build topical authority, and finally, connect your Google Search Console account for your sites so we can crawl and understand your actual content, find what keywords you rank for, and then help you optimize and continually refine your content with targeted, personalized advice to keep your traffic growing. If you're interested in learning more about me personally or looking for dedicated consulting advice, then visit www.eddawson.com. Bye for now, and see you in the next episode of SEO is Not That Hard.